Welcome back to episode 5 of the NPK show. It's just me today, but we're talking about media. It's all about the science. So Barry's got a little bit scared. He's had enough science over the last 2 episodes and he's gone to build. So Barry's going to be back in a few weeks' time, hopefully with something special. But this week's episode's all about the media, not social media though, the good stuff, the cocoa, the soil, the pebbles, everything that you're growing in. So let's get into it. Let's go downstairs and talk media. Episode 5, it's all about the media. So today we're going to be talking mostly about soil and cocoa, but other medias hydroponic users might grow with, things like rockwool, clay pebbles, hydromis or hydroton, but we're going to mostly focus on soil and cocoa. Now, soil isn't technically soil like you find outside. It's peat-based, and a lot of the time comes with perlite. And peat came from the glaciers, the glacial age, the ice age. When they retreated, they left a lot of vegetation. And when that vegetation died, it created peat and peat moss. And we have different layers of peat. The best ones in Canna Professional will use things like white peat, which is highly available. It's not endangered because there's some peat that is running out, and really high quality. Now, with soil and cocoa, people might talk about cation exchange capacity, the CEC. And in simple terms, all that means is the ability for the soil or the cocoa to hold on to cations, which are positively charged electrons. The higher the CEC, the more that the soil and cocoa can hold on to the nutrients. So if your soil's got a high CEC, it means that it can feed the plant as and when the plant wants. Things with a low CEC, you're going to need to feed more often to make sure it doesn't go deficient. Now, when we move on later and we look at some ranges of soil and cocoa, I'm going to explain the differences on why people prefer soil and why people prefer cocoa. But to move on to cocoa, cocoa is the husk from coconut shells, mostly from Sri Lanka, mostly from islands and from sea areas, but not always. So with the cocoa that comes from the islands and from seafronts, there's a high residual content of salt and naturally potassium. So the really good quality cocoa is rinsed out and cleaned. And then we have to buffer the cocoa. Otherwise, when you're adding your nutrients, it loves to hold on to calcium and magnesium, so you can tend to get deficiencies. There's so many factors to think about when you're choosing your soil and choosing your cocoa. And even though it's simple and easy to think that the £9 bag of cocoa is just the same as the 12 or the £15 of cocoa, there's a lot of differences. The whole cocoa has to be digested, so to speak. It has to be allowed to decompose. Otherwise, the benefits aren't there. So there's a lot of aspects to which cocoa, which soil you should go with, and we'll attempt to look into that today. Now, I want to give you some examples. We've got some rockwools. These are rockwool cubes, inert media, got nothing in them. Now, the thing that I want to say about rockwools is that you used to have to, especially with grow dams, you used to have to pH them in about a 5 to 5.5 solution. But they've changed the way that they make the rockwools now. So you no longer have to pH. But me personally, force of habit, I still like to put them to a soaked 24 hours, pH 5.5, and then I think that they're ready to go. But you don't have to do it anymore. Just in a solution of 7 and they're ready to go. These are brilliant for plants because there's a high oxygen or air ratio to the amount of rockwool that there is. So even when it's fully soaked, the plant can still breathe. So very good choice of media. It's a hydroponic media, brilliant for drippers and very good for starting off young babies or seedlings. We'll have a look at some soil now and show you what the soil looks like on the components that make up a great soil. So what I've got here is soil. Dutch Pro All Mix. Now All Mix has quite heavy nutrients in it already, so you don't need to feed with any terra feeds. Just water would be fine. If you want to go for a slightly lower nutrient content, a light mix is preferable for you. But soils come with the white bits in them, and that's perlite. It helps with the oxygenation at the root zone, because with soil, you'll be top feeding, and you don't want to compress the soil too much, and the perlite will help maintain the structure within your pot. So we'll be talking about why you choose soil, but it's quite hard to pick which soil is right for you. So you want to do your research and find out what's going to work for you as a grower, whether it's all mix, which has got a high content of nutrients, whether it's a light mix, or whether it's a professional mix with the highest quality grade soil and peat and sphagnum moss available. So we have got the DNA Mills Coco with cork. This cocoa has taken the industry by storm, especially in the UK. Very high quality cocoa, very clean, very well buffered. I hear only good things about the Coco Mills. With the cork, it helps retain a lot of oxygen. And that, I think, is the best part of the mills. You can feed and feed and feed. And the people who tend to overwater get the best out of mills, because even though it can retain a lot of water, it still maintains the amount of high oxygen within it. Another media that you're going to want to grow in, it's sometime in your grow career, are pebbles. These are clay pebbles. These are baked to a very high temperature. Now, the number one tip if you're growing in pebbles, well, there's two top tips. First of all, rinse your pebbles. Well, we've got kind of aqua pebbles here. And what I would do is I'd put some holes in the bottom and rinse through with a shower head or a hose pipe and get rid of all the clay particles on it. Make sure that your clays are really clean before you put your plants into it. And the second top tip is make sure you're feeding often and irrigating frequently. Clay pebbles don't hold any nutrients. They hold very few nutrients. It's got a low CEC, cation exchange capacity. So with pebbles, if you're in a flood and drain, you'd be flood and draining once every half an hour. And when you're in heavy feeding, maybe once every 15 minutes. Drippers will be on constantly. And in DWC, pebbles are just there to maintain structure and the roots are sitting in the water. Whatever media that you decide to go with, make sure you do your research. Top tips like rinsing pebbles, top tips like top feeding in the soil or bottom feeding the cocoa. I'm going to show you what happens if you're a bit too overzealous with top feeding cocoa. So, have you ever been in your room and you think, hang on a minute, somebody's stealing the top of my cocoa here. It was up to here and now it's down there. Well, nobody's stealing your cocoa. And what your problem is, you're a bit too overzealous with the top feeding. And what happens is when you pour a lot of water in very quickly, it pushes the cocoa down, and this removes all of the air pockets that the roots love. I'm going to give you an example. Just before I do this, this is also a good example of flushing. This is an 11-litre pot, and when you come to do a systemic flush, you want to go through 3 times the amount of the pot in water. So this would require 33 litres of water to give it a proper systemic flush. And this is what I have here. So watch, I'm going to go really heavy with the watering. And what you find when all that settles, and all the water's run out, it's absorbed all of its water, fluff it up a little bit. It's a little bit difficult to see, but I'll tip it. That was the line that the cocoa was placed at. And you can see it's dropped about ½ an inch, and that's off one watering. Now, if you're doing this every 3 days, then it's going to push it down and push it down and push it down and further until what you end up with is a real compressed block of cocoa. And like I said, it removes all of the air pockets within the cocoa, and the roots are going to struggle a little bit. So what you do, if you are an overzealous feeder or somebody's watering your plants for you and you know that they can't be taught either way, the best method is just water very lightly so you're not compressing the cocoa. But a top tip, and this has multiple benefits. This is fresh pebbles, so you can see the dust. Like we mentioned before, you've got to clean the dust off. But we're just doing this as an example. You put a layer of pebbles over the top of your soil or your cocoa, and in traditional garden, this is called mulching. And what happens is when it's really hot a lot of the water evaporates and leaves a lot of salty deposits around the top, and you can find that it gets a little bit white. That's the water evaporating, leaving the salts behind, which is not a good thing. But what the Pebbles are doing here is if I was still overzealous and feeding really aggressively, the Pebbles take the brunt of the pressure and it doesn't compress the cocoa. So you can be safe knowing that the oxygen pockets are still going to be there. And if they love being a little bit overzealous, then they're going to be all right, because the Pebbles are going to take the brunt force of your overfeeding. Now, this water here, that's my favourite type of method of feeding cocoa. It's the bottom feed. Now, imagine a beautiful plant here, and you watered a day ago. This is a lot of water to be left for 24 hours in a tray, and it means that the plant isn't drinking as much as you think it would be. But the plant next to it has sucked up all this water completely. So this plant wants more, and this plant wants less. When you bottom feed, you can really get into what the plant wants. So you give them the right amount. You're not wasting water, because what a lot of people would do now is throw this away. So top tip when you're feeding your cocoa, if you're going to top feed, use Pebbles, and that will make sure that if you have to be quick and top feed aggressively, it's not going to compress the cocoa. And in hot weather, it means that evaporation is going to be a lot less, because the lamps are going to heat up the cocoa and remove the moisture. Now, if you're bottom feeding, you would get rid of this ideally within 2 hours, so it's not just sitting there. Because what happens is, with cocoa, you overfeed, a lot of water is retained because the high moisture content that the cocoa can hold on to, and it's going to lead to pythium. So there's the top tips: top feeding and bottom feeding. My preference is to bottom feed, because you can give the plants exactly what they want. Let's move over, have a little look at some different soils, different cocos, and get some more top tips. Let's head over there now and see what we've got. Okay, so it's the big question. Do I use soil? Do I use cocoa? Or do I use some other hydro media? So let's have a little think about each media individually. Soil traditionally has been used the most. It's been around the longest. So there's a lot of literature around it. So I can understand why a lot of people will move to soil, because there's so much information available. Soil has a very high CEC, cation exchange capacity, meaning it can hold on to a lot of positively charged nutrients. And this gives a certain amount of buffering. So if you forget to feed 1 week, or you feed too much, the soil can hold on to nutrients or release nutrients as and when the plant needs it. Soil's brilliant for organic growing. It's a brilliant environment for the microbes that need to break down the organic compounds into the ions, ready for uptake by the plant. And with pH and EC, it's very stable. It's really hard to make a mistake with soil, because like I said, with EC, it can release and attract ions as and when it needs. And with pH, it stabilises the pH for you. It's got a great buffering capacity, and it's a brilliant all-round media for beginners. Essential for organic growers. And unfortunately, if you're a bit of a lazy grower, it's the right media for you. Soil is mostly peat. So not the person peat, it's PEAT. The sphagnum moss and peat come from, like we talked before, retreating glaciers. And there's different types of peat: black peat, white peat, and the different types of peat that you use dictates how good the soil is. A good difference to show you: Canna Terra Professional, very good soil, good buffering, good CEC, a good all-round soil. The Terra Professional Plus, however, is pretty much fully organic, the best quality white peat, and just all round, a lot of the ingredients in it at the top end. And you'll expect to pay £14 for this soil, £12 for that soil. What do you want to get from your plants? How much do you want to invest in your media? How easy do you want your life? You can also get the cheaper soils. We've got Dutch Pro Light Mix, less nutrients, and Dutch Pro All Mix, more nutrients. So do you want to feed with water for the first 2 weeks? Go with All Mix. Do you want to feed with water just for the first week while they're establishing? Go for the Light Mix. Now, soil, I can't sing its praises enough, but there are some disadvantages. The quality, the taste, the aromas, the flavours will all be tremendous in soil, because you can't make mistakes. And where the mistakes will come from, is when you overfeed cocoa, you can tend to burn the plant a little bit. You have burn tips, high EC, and that can affect the flavour and the aromas. With soil, it's hard to do, so you get that great flavour. But the yields don't tend to be there with soil, and that's because, in my opinion, it's the air to soil ratio. The cocoa is much better. So let's think about cocoa. Cocoa, better air exchange. So oxygen at the root zone is very important. And with a higher oxygen at the root zone, better root system, better ability to uptake nutrients, and therefore better yields. Now there's a debate. What gives better flavour, aroma and quality plant? When people say soil, it's because it's really hard to make a mistake in soil, and it's a lot easier to make a mistake in cocoa. So people tend to believe that soil gives you better quality and flavour. But if you feed really well with cocoa and don't make mistakes, you become the plant whisperer. Cocoa can be just as good. And because of its natural ability to hold air at the same time as holding a lot of water, you're going to get the increased yields. So you've got soil growers, you've got cocoa growers, and then you've got your true hydroponics. Now, to be very specific, true hydroponics is when the roots are suspended in a nutrient-rich solution. Everything else has got a bit of a buffer capacity. True hydroponics doesn't, so you've got to be really on the ball. Media, though, for hydroponics is things like clay pebbles and rock wool. They don't hold on to as much nutrients as soil and cocoa. They've got a lower CEC cation exchange capacity. The benefits with things like clay pebbles, you can irrigate a lot more often because the oxygen at the root zone is always available, and that means you can feed pretty much constantly, especially with clay pebbles. Rock wool is brilliant for drippers. As well as being saturated, it can still hold a lot of air, it can still hold a lot of oxygen, so the roots are never truly starved of oxygen. There's different types of watering methods and different techniques for feeding the plants. I'm going to cover these in a few episodes' time. But to recap, soil, cocoa, and hydro. Soil, brilliant for beginners. It's essential for organic growers, and it's essential for you if you're a lazy grower. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Some people just haven't got a lot of time to dedicate to the plants, but they still want to grow plants. Soil's the best option for you. If you want to move on and get those high yields, cocoa is brilliant. And there's other cocos as well. A 60-40 is brilliant because it's got clay pebbles in it, so you can afford to water more frequently. If you're in a flood and drain system, 60-40 is really the only option. Pebbles are okay, but you've got to flood and drain while the lights are on, probably every half an hour. If that pump fails, things can go wrong. With the 60-40 mix, because the cocoa can hold onto nutrients and hold onto water, if that pump fails, it's going to give you a little bit of time to find out and sort out the problem without killing your plants. True hydro, in my opinion, it's the best method to grow plants. The nutrients are always available. If you keep your pH and your EC and your water temperature right, and you make sure that there's adequate oxygen through air stones, there's no better method for growing. But each to their own. You can go onto all the forums that you want. You can speak to all the people that you want, and everyone's got an opinion. If you ask me, it's hydroponics, but that's not best for the organic growers. So find out what's right for you, and what's right for you is completely different from what's right for everybody else. Soil, cocoa, hydro. That's pretty much it wrapped up. Now we're going to do some science. Looking for the best cocoa, you want to understand EC levels and buffering capacity. With cocoa especially, the different grades of cocoa can have different effects on the plant. Low-grade cocoa holds on to calcium and magnesium, so it can be a good idea to buffer the cheaper cocoa with some CalMag before you start your initial feeding. The better quality cocos have been washed, which means they've had all the potassium salt and residual salts that naturally occur washed out and which the plant doesn't want. And when it's buffered, they've had calcium and magnesium run through it already. So meaning when you feed your plants with your nutrients, the cocoa's already got adequate supply of calcium and magnesium and isn't going to steal yours from your plants. There's a lot of things that goes on with cocoa as well. And the better quality cocos, you really do pay for what's going on behind the scenes. So what we're going to do, we're going to head upstairs. I'm going to show you a 1 to 1.5 extraction method. You can do this if you want to test how clean your cocoa is. You can use this to test if there's any problems. Take a sample of cocoa and use this extraction method to test how the EC and how the pH is performing at the root zone. So let's head upstairs and let's go and do some science. I almost forgot. Compressed cocoa. This is a pretty new innovation that's come out in the last few years. I've used a lot of compressed cocoa to find out what the best is. And the best is U-Grow that I've found. You can get the compressed cocoa in bricks that come in the cardboard box, but like we were just talking about, it's got a high salt content and the buffering capacity is almost nothing. So a lot of growers have problems with it. But this is, for compressed cocoa, pretty good. Now, bags of cocoa, the cheapest bag of cocoa, in my opinion, is still better than compressed cocoa because it's pushing all the air out of the cocoa and you've got to really fluff it up to get the most from it. But a top tip that I really wanted to get across in this episode, do not put the compressed cocoa in the bath without the bath plug, or even with the bath plug and water. Get it up to where it needs to be, fluff it up, because a lot of people will block their bath plugs. And that means dinorod's coming out and nobody wants that for the bathroom. So find yourself a 70-litre tub. It's better to go higher because this actually produces 70 litres. So if you can get yourself a 150-litre tub, the big rectangular ones that we use for DWC are ideal. And chop this into quarters, put it in and add a little bit of water at a time. The instructions on the back say to add 18 litres of water. But what I would do is I would add 6 litres, 6 litres and 6 litres and just slowly build it up. Make sure you get breaking up all the clumps and that way you're going to get the best from compressed cocoa. I can walk out of here now with 140 litres on my left hand and 140 litres in my right hand. So it's easy to transport, which is a big bonus for a lot of people. But for ease of transport, you're going to sacrifice quality. So it's your decision. But hopefully we've given you a little insight into compressed cocoa. And if you're looking for a good one, U-Grow is very good. The U-Grow Gold with trichoderma is even better. One final thing, we're going to cover this next part in the systems episode, which is a few weeks away. But something I want to touch on very quickly. Cloth pots and air pots. The reason I wanted to touch on them is because we've spoke a lot about how much oxygen the roots are getting. And traditional plastic pots tend to suffocate your plants. So cloth pots allow the roots to breathe. If you don't overwater, cloth pots are brilliant. If you tend to overwater, air pots are brilliant because the air can attack all the way around the media, so it'll dry it out. So if you do overwater, it's air pots. If you're a good person, you don't overwater, it's cloth pots. But we're going to discuss that more, and let's head upstairs finally to go and do some science. Let's go. Okay, it's the 1 to 1.5 extraction method for testing EC and pH in cocoa. Now, don't get too excited. This is real heavy science, and I've just about contained myself. Barry is nowhere to be seen. I haven't seen him all day, but so I get to do all the science I want. To get into it, we want to measure the EC and the pH of cocoa. Now, the easy way to do it is to check your runoff, but that's not very accurate. It doesn't get the EC and the pH around the root zone, which is what you're looking for. So first of all, if you're looking to buy a new bag of cocoa, a new brand of cocoa, then you might want to test how clean it is. And when I say clean, we want a lack of residual salts, salts that we don't really want to grow the plant. So when you open up your bag of cocoa, it's going to come really dry. I've got the Mills DNA cocoa here, one of the top performing cocos around in the industry. Now what you don't want is, it's really, because it's fresh out the bag, it's really dry, and that's not good for an extraction method. So we're going to put that down for now. And what you do, you get the cocoa out the bag and you add distilled water, just enough so that it moistens up the cocoa. And when you take your sample and you give it a squeeze, the water runs between your fingers but doesn't drip. And that's the perfect amount of moisture to have in your cocoa. We're going to make a mess today, so it's okay. Next thing is 150 ml of distilled water or RO water. Now, I collected my distilled water from the RO machine that we were using a couple of weeks ago, so I know it's got absolutely nothing in it. To prove it, no light on the EC junction. It's clean water. So 150 ml measured out. And then what you want to do is add enough of this moistened cocoa to take it to 250 ml. I'm going to make lots of mess here because it's great. I can clean up later. And this is called the 1 to 1.5 extraction method. It's the most widely used extraction method in the industry. And what we need to do is fill it to 250. Obviously, you're probably going to want to be a little bit neater than me, but I like making a bit of a mess. It's fun. And see where we're getting up to. 200 ml. A little bit more to get us up to the 250 ml. And we're nearly there. Now, the reason that you want to use the 1 to 1.5 extraction method is because it's so widely used, you can compare your results to other people's results. And as long as you do it the same time and time again, then you know that your results are going to be comparable to other people's 1 to 1.5 extraction methods. And that is us. I need to be accurate. I can't be rush this and not be accurate. I need to take it to exactly 250 ml. I think that should do us. And then what you need to do, give it a good shake. And that's got to be left for, some people say 15 minutes, but if you're going to do this type of test, it's best to leave it for about 2 hours. So I'm going to leave that for 2 hours and we'll come back and we'll do the rest of the test and see what Mills DNA Cocoa has got in it residually. So meet me back here in 2 hours, or with the pleasure of YouTube in a second.
2 hours later.
Nobody said science happens quickly. It's been 2 hours and this has been allowed to stand for 2 hours. So we should have the best result that we can get. To recap, RO water, 150 ml. Add your fresh cocoa that's been pre-moistened with RO water to 250 ml. Leave for 2 hours and we're ready to go. Now I've got this really fancy method of getting rid of the cocoa particles and just adding the water. Really expensive piece of kit. You can get them from real high-tech pharmaceutical companies. But not everybody needs to spend this amount of money. I just like to get the best kit possible. What lovely sounds this makes. I used a conical flask because it looked really sciencey and it's very accurate. But on looking back, it's not the best one for getting out your cocoa. I'm going to flick brown sludge at everyone. Right, hopefully that should give us enough water to be able to take a sample and test it. You only need enough to be able to measure the EC. And there we go. Hopefully that works. I'll leave that for a few minutes to drain off. We have our lovely sludgy sample. Let's see how clean Mills is. EC junction. And it's reading 0.6. And that's not bad for a cocoa. We've done tests on all the other cocoa, and we're going to be putting those up at the end of the episode so you can see. But Mills cocoa coming in at 0.6 is really good. It's a very, and from RO water, to having that there, it's a good, clean cocoa. So that's the extraction method for straight out the bag cocoa. Now what you want to be testing as a grower is the EC and the pH when the plant is in the pot. Now, some people don't like doing this because you can disturb the root system. So what I would say is do the test when you're buying a new bag of cocoa and make sure that it's clean. And then be testing the cocoa just before you flick your plants into flower or before you start to see flowering sites. That way you know that any issues can be resolved while you're still in the veg state. And the other time to be doing this test is if you do think that there's a problem, you can do the test and rule out too high in EC, too low in EC, or pH levels that are out of sync with what the plant wants for uptake of nutrients. So make sure that the cocoa in your pot is similar to the cocoa here. When you get it when you get it in your hand and you squeeze it, that water runs out but doesn't drip. It runs between your fingers, and that's the ideal state. What you want to do is collect the sample, as many samples as possible, but you be the decider of how much you want to affect your roots and how important this test is for you. I'd be taking 2 samples, one from either side, put them into a pot. If it needs extra RO water, add the RO water and follow the procedure exactly as we've just done with the straight, fresh out the bag cocoa. And that's the extraction test for cocoa, the 1 to 1.5 EC method. So I was at Nottingham and I tested in depth what Mills cocoa's really got in it, and we digested some cocoa. So let's head over and see the Nottingham Trent scene. And you can see me digesting some cocoa. Science, we love it, we love it. Right, so we're back in the labs. We're about to digest some cocoa with cork, some soil, Dutch Pro, and some Cocoa Natural by Canna. And it's going to be in a pressurised container, and we're going to find out exactly what's in the cocoa and what's in the soil. We're going to use some nitric acid, so I've been told we need a double glove. And also, the red stuff in the bottle here, we were going to use this thing called Aqua Regis. And as soon as we opened the lid, we decided not to use Aqua Regis because the smell was foul and nearly killed me. So, double gloved up, 80% nitric acid, 70% nitric acid. Glasses on, let's digest some soil. So we're back from Nottingham Trent University, and what an amazing test that we did. The digestion of cocoa, something I've never done before. The data results are going to be on episode 12 on the results show. And yeah, some interesting data coming through. So that's it for episode 5 on media, soil and hydroponics media. Now a top tip before we wrap it up. Top feeding and bottom feeding, both are okay. My preference is to bottom feed in cocoa because, like people, plants are individuals. Some will like to drink a lot, some will not drink so much, and some will love what you give them. So when you bottom feed, you can see which plants are sucking it right up, which plants are leaving it alone, and which plants are happy. And then you can modify how much nutrients and water you give into each plant and get the best from each plant. With soil, it's just top feeding. It doesn't tend to compress as much, which is the main problem with top feeding cocoa. If you're too overzealous with top feeding the cocoa, it can compress and you feel as though someone's stealing the top layer of your cocoa, but it's not. It's just too much water pushing down on the top of the cocoa and it's removing the air pockets around the roots, which is a bad thing. The roots need oxygen. So if you're top feeding, make sure it's very gentle so you're not pushing the cocoa down. But if you're like me, it's best to bottom feed and see which individual plant is taking up which water, which amount of water, and how much they're enjoying life with their watering cycles. So it's been a bit of a mad summer with the World Cup. The heat we've had in the UK has been phenomenal. Heat wave, 30 degrees, crazy. Grow rooms have been going hot. And with all the festivals as well, summer's been an intense time. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a mid-season break so I can get back in my grow room and sort all the plants out because I'll be honest, I've abandoned my grow room and hopefully everything will be all right. But we'll be back and I'll be showing you how to mix your nutrients, but not just mixing nutrients. We'll be looking at mineral nutrients, organic nutrients, blends of nutrients, how they affect your pH and EC, and what is the best nutrient for you. Because don't forget, the final point we make before our break is that all nutrients are good nutrients, but it's what's right for you. So that's what we're going to get into. So join us, subscribe. If you've got any more comments about today's episode, leave them below. And one final thing before mid-season break, thank you to everyone that's subscribed so far. Thank you to everybody that sends the messages in of support. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to bringing the second half of the show. It's going to be very good. So see you on the 31st of August, Friday, 6 o'clock. I need to get in this grow room and find out what's going on. See you later.